Hi folks, and welcome to this edition of Hope on Wheels. My name is Travis. In this edition of Hope on Wheels, I am going to be talking about something that honestly happened to me a few weeks ago, but it affects anybody that has a challenge or anybody that is a guardian of somebody with a challenge. But to be more specific than that, it affects people who also work for the same organization that provides their support. Um, and what that is, most people probably know that over the next year or so, we are all required to get federally compliant IDs. This was started back during our previous president's administration. Um, and so now we have to get a totally different new ID that is everybody across the nation is being required to do, being required to get that kind of ID. You can get one that is not federally compliant as your new ID. However, I don't recommend that because unless you have a passport, which most people with a challenge don't, most, not all, the ID covers you if you don't have a passport. The kicker is, though, I found out when I was at the DMV, if you get the regular one and you don't get the federally compliant one and you leave the state of Alaska and you try to get back in with just a regularly renewed ID and not the federally compliant state ID, you're not going to be able to get back in. So the reason I'm bringing this up is that when I went to get my ID renewed probably 3.5 weeks ago or so, I ran into a problem when I did that. And the problem's a bit unique, but a bunch of people who experience a challenge um, generally will work for the same organization that they receive their supports for their services from. It's a pretty common thing. It just makes it easier. Um, but it causes a problem. That problem is when you go to the DMV and you fill out the form that everybody has to fill out that's basic on an ID, you need two forms of proof of address. You need your Social Security card and you need your birth certificate. Well, I had the Social Security card, birth certificate, and the two different pieces of mail, which was hard for me to get two different pieces because I don't get a lot of mail to my door because nowadays, as most people know, everything is done electronically. Um, so I had two pieces of mail, um, and I had my old ID because my old ID was not expired yet, but it was getting close, so I wanted to go ahead and get my new ID. I went to the DMV, filled out the paperwork there for the new ID, went up there, had everything with me. I went over the paperwork, I went over the DMV website, it said what to bring. The problem came down to it that when I got there, they don't tell you that when you're applying for that ID that you can't use your current ID that's not expired yet as part of your identification. They insist on two actual pieces of mail that show your address. Well, then my next step became, I guess I got to leave and go get something else that shows my address because the two pieces of mail that I had, they needed to see it from two different vantage points. They wanted to see two different places that it's coming from. Because my problem was I had two pieces of mail. One was my invoice that shows proof of residency at my address, that shows my rent as what I'm charged per month via the agency for my rent. And then the other was just a piece of mail saying that I get mail at that address. Pretty basic. It wasn't enough though. I ended up having to go back to the house to get an actual piece of mail that was more serious. That wasn't just a piece of junk mail, in other words. So I ended up bringing a copy of my tax return with me. Well, I work for the same company that provides my support. I thought we were all good because I even asked before I left, would a copy of my tax return form before it gets used for applying for taxes be enough? She said, yeah, as long as it has your address on it and it shows that it's you there, or that you live there and all of that. So I went back to the house, grabbed it, and went back to the DMV, went through that process. I get there and a different lady takes a look at everything and says, we can't use this as part of your identification. And I said, what? This, I was told by this other lady, and I gave her the card with the lady's name on it, that this would be fine. She said the reason it's not is because not only is your landlord the same company, but so is your employer. We need completely different, let's call them vendors, to prove that you're a resident of this address and it's not just fabricated. So what I ended up having to do, and this is important for somebody with a disability, there's a way around this, but what I ended up having to do, some of you, not this month, but last month, or 2 months ago, rather, I'm sorry, might have seen the video that describes how to report your wages and find out information for what your needs are, as far as Social Security is concerned. So what I ended up having to do was I went to the Social Security website by using my phone, and I grabbed a copy of my wage receipt, and I forwarded that to the lady. They printed it off right there, and I was able to use that. Basically, that's just a federal way to prove that you live there, and a way to show that it's a state and federal document that proves that you live at that address, and it's not you just making up something. The problem becomes most people with disabilities don't get the mail to them. It gets given to a payee or something like that, and if they don't have that information on them, that's where the issue comes in, and they would end up having to go back and forth to the DMV a couple of times. By the way, this is not the type of ID that you can apply for it online, send in a picture, and get it. You have to physically go into the DMV. You can print the form off of their website to reapply for a new ID, like you always do. Fill it out, take it in, and not have to do it there under a lot of people being there and not having a place to write. You can do that. But again, the biggest thing I want to stress here is that if you're an individual with a challenge, or you're a guardian of someone with a challenge, if the individual that is applying for the ID for someone, or they're applying for it for themselves. If they work for the same place that provides their support, especially, you're gonna need to basically find a federal document beyond your social security number and stuff like that, or find a legal document that you're not afraid to show a copy of, showing that you are living at that residence. It can't be a invoice and then like a W-2 or something like they originally told me it can be, because they're saying it's the same vendor, it's the same location. So you want to make sure that you have something else. My advice, the easiest thing to get to fix that problem is going to be just the wage receipt. It's easy. Or if you don't want to do that, if you don't want to show that personal information, just print off a copy, go on to the administration website um, where you report the wages, and just print a copy of your proof of benefits letter, because that has your address on it. It has information stating that you live at this residency and that you've been approved. There's no way they're going to deny that. But every other way that you try to do this, they will. So you're better off bringing a state document, which generally is just your rent receipt in my case, or cost of care receipt, whatever you want to consider it, depending upon how you pay your rent, and then one of those two types of federal documents, because otherwise you're not going to be able to get it. They're going to keep sending you back to go get something else. It was a real pain in the neck. I went through this. It took hours to get this straightened out. Once I'd figured that out, though, I knew I had to at least put a video out there to explain this basic thing. Again, the federal ID is something that I would recommend you get. Get the federal compliant one, because yeah, you as an individual with a challenge, or you as the guardian for this individual, may say, well, this person never travels outside of the state. Well, that may be true, because I don't travel outside of Alaska that much, if hardly ever. The last time I did it was almost 8-9 years ago. So there's no really a big deal. The problem is, if I ever have to, if I have just the basic state ID and not the federally compliant state ID, I'm not going to be able to get back into the state of Alaska. They already tell you that. That's the new policy. You have to have the federally compliant one just to get back into the state that you already live in. It's just, that's something that they warned me about because I was just going to get the basic state one, and they said, do you ever travel outside of the state? I said, no, but there's a chance of it. I don't know. They said, well, then we would recommend getting the federally compliant one, because if you ever leave for any reason, doesn't matter what the reason is, and you try to get back in and you just have the state basic one, you're not going to be able to at all. It's something that they've changed. If you have the federally compliant one, if you're challenged, you're good. Doesn't matter where you go in the country, as far as the U.S. anyway, you can get back in. But if you have just the basic state one, you're kind of stuck. The other difference is the federal one that's federally compliant is good for 7 years. The one that's just the basic state compliant one is not good for 7 years. It's a lower amount. I didn't see how long, because I wanted to get the one that was going to cover me, no ifs, ands, or buts, based on circumstances. And besides, they also said that the rules that I just went over with you about the identification, about needing, different levels of proof if your landlord also happens to be where you work, especially getting something from the federal, printing off a federal document, such as the proof of benefits letter that's from Social Security, or the wage report receipt, if you're comfortable. That'll just ensure that you're going to be able to get the ID. Doesn't matter what it's state, or it's just the state compliant one or the federal one, because they've changed the rules and you can't use something from the same company even if it's two different styles of document. They're insisting now that they be completely different. They had to be different companies entirely, which again is a very big downside. I don't like the fact that they've changed that, but again, I didn't want anybody else that tried to go get an ID for somebody with a challenge or themselves to have to go through what I did. Well, that's the end of this video. I know it's probably a little confusing, but at this point, I'll say what I always say. If you have any questions or concerns about this topic, you can feel free to leave the questions or concerns in the comments down below, and I do read them, and I will do my best to answer any questions you may have. If you'd rather talk to me personally and get some questions answered, you can email me at T as in Travis, Noah, Noah, at hopealaska.org, and I will answer your questions promptly, and we can go from there. I can even help you with the process like how I did it, face-to-face, or you can call and I can talk you through it. But I definitely think this is something that we all need to be careful of from now on, that when we are going to apply for IDs, that we make sure that we have completely different documents that have nothing to do, even if it's proof of address, that has nothing to do with the agency that you're with, other than proof of rent, proof of occupancy. Beyond that, you need to have something that is addressed to you, to your address, but is not within the same company if you work for them. If you don't, I still recommend, if you don't work for the organization that provides your care, I still recommend those two different documents of either the wage invoice or the proof of benefits letter, because that's what I had to use and it worked. But anyway, folks, that's the end of this video. I hope this helps with you guys going out and getting our new IDs. If you have any questions, again, please feel free to get a hold of me. Have a good day, and I'll see you next time. Thanks.